Hi everyone, this is audap. Let's continue our game of Iwaihime on PC. Meanwhile, the soot-gathering ritual, which would seal all the cursed soot into Susanome, had already begun. As per tradition, the sacrifice would cleanse herself with divine sake and salt. Next, she would part with the gods and spirits that protected her, rinsing herself of right and wrong alike. Once her body was spiritually pure, she would smear the soot swept up from across the village all over her. Stark naked amidst the watching villagers, Susanome plastered the soot that had blanketed the mountain across her body. Her porcelain skin was stained black with the cursed soot. Yet somehow it was absorbed into her body and faded in moments. The men observed from a distance. At first they'd been staring scandalously at her, but now they were all seized with tension. Eventually, all the soot was gone. Her whole body had absorbed the curse like a sponge. And finally, they reached the last step. She would be sealed into the bell for 3 days and 3 nights in order to seal the curse into her body permanently. Susanome nodded to the mayor to let him know she was ready. The mayor nodded back and gestured towards the bell. Susanome slowly gazed up at the sky and took one last look at the picturesque scenery of the mountains. Once my body fully takes in this curse, how will the world change? How will this beautiful world look to these cursed eyes? I can tell. This is the last time the wind will feel so pleasant, the air smells so fragrant, the sky gleams so blue. But if it means saving Mutsu and protecting the village he holds so dear, then I shall go through with this and say farewell to my final attachments to this life. Susanome entered the raised bell and sat down. She then closed her eyes and concentrated. Before long, her senses of sight and hearing were completely sealed away. Amidst the silent world, Susanome quietly gave in to her fate.
Yosh, 釣り鐘をかぶせるのじゃ。
The men slowly approached the bell with axes in hand. Once they cut the logs holding the bell up, Susanome would be sealed beneath it.
待てー!
Mutsu rushed into the temple grounds. Panicking, the mayor urged the men to seal the sacrifice away before it was too late.
今助ける! スズノメ!
But his cries failed to reach the woman who had accepted her fate and closed off her heart. A group of nearby men rushed Mutsu in an attempt to hold him back.
ゾッキャー! 邪魔をするな! 取り押さえろ! 殺しても構わぬ!
Mutsu tossed aside the men grappling him with one after the next, his face a mask of demonic fury. Though they far outnumbered him, the men faltered at his feats of superhuman strength. His blows had knocked out their front teeth, leaving them clutching their broken wrists and groaning as they writhed about.
鬼じゃ! 何をもたもたしておるか! さっさと釣り鐘を落とすのじゃ! スズノメ!
The men gripping Mutsu were tossed back. Everyone knew Mutsu boasted of his strength, But his power at this moment was beyond their wildest imaginations. The adrenaline was all it took to overpower the men. Nothing could stand in Mitsu's way, nothing but the giant bell they were trying to seal Susanome in. But in a cruel twist of fate, the bell hit the ground and shook the earth with a heavy roar, trapping Susanome inside. Yet Mitsu's charge could not be stopped. In fact, his legs started hitting the ground harder and faster. He put all his might into his toes and kicked off the ground so intensely it nearly shattered beneath him. After that, he entrusted his fist with his whole desire to save Susanome. And with a thunderous howl, he swung that fist filled with his very heart and soul. Everyone around heard the crack of the sky being torn asunder. That sound had been Mitsu's fist striking the bell. Could he truly break through the giant mass of bronze with his bare fist? Could such a miracle truly unfold? No one would have been surprised if it did indeed shatter. That was a testament to the drive behind Mitsu's punch. But then, Mitsu slowly fell to his knees. He gripped his trembling fist, now gushing with blood. It was broken. It was hardly a wonder. How could a fist ever smash through such a thick hunk of metal? But his drive had been so fierce, it almost seemed possible. Mitsu wept and groaned as he clung to the bell. He then braced his legs as if trying to wrestle a giant tree, but the bell didn't even budge. Mitsu no longer had the vigor to bring about a miracle. All that was left was the futile struggling of a feeble man who had exhausted everything he had.
何をぼやっとしておる皆の衆陸奥を殺せ生かしておけばやがて何をするかわからぬぞすず
Mitsu screamed once again, but it possessed none of the gallant spirit of his previous roar, merely the sorrowful howl of a wounded wolf. Mitsu started staggering away. The men cleared a path. The mayor had ordered them to kill him, but Mitsu's soul was already dead. Even if only faintly, the men pitied the pathetic sight of a man who'd failed to save his beloved.
陸奥次に姿を見せるときは容赦なく撃つぞどこへとも失せてのたれ死にするがいい
Mitsu didn't respond. Maybe he hadn't even heard him. He just continued weeping as he disappeared down the mountain path, racked with despair. That was the last time the villagers ever saw Mitsu. After 3 days and nights had passed, the bell was moved aside, revealing the pitiful state of the sacrifice. Her eyes were dim and unfocused, truly as though she transformed into a cursed puppet that only existed to breathe. From that day onward, Susanome forever drifted the sea between nightmares and reality. Having lost all her spiritual defenses, she was like a bonfire on a cold, dark night for evil spirits. Seeking fresh warmth, they swarmed her one after another, subjecting her soul to a chain of grief, suffering, envy, and anger. No one apart from her could ever understand what sort of terrifying hell tormented her being. To them, it just looked like she was merely spacing out.
よいか、皆の衆。この女子に我らの村の呪いがすべて封じ込められておる。もしこの女子の身に何かがあれば、呪いは再び解き放たれてしまうのじゃ。
ムツが奪いに来るやもしれん。
悲観して二人して心中などされたらたまらぬぞ。
それだけは何としても避けねばならぬ。それに突然我に返って受水でもされてはたまらぬのでな。牢を作るのじゃ。そこにこやつを閉じ込めておけば安泰というもの。
The mare had promised the sacrifice would be treated courteously for the rest of her life. Yet from that day onward, she was treated like a mere criminal. They brought Suzunome to a cave and imprisoned her there. She wasn't allowed to live or die. All she could do was suffer from those nightmares until the end of her days came. No one repaid her for her sacrifice. Instead, they acted like she was a pariah. This was the start of her and their 1,000-year living hell. Suzunome slowly rose to her feet in the dark cave. Her eyes shone just like those of the sacred deer.
人にね、姑息なことを。すすだきの秘術にて我を封じるとは、どこまでも姑息な。だが、人の子の術など永遠に続きはせぬ。
The spell required each generation to birth a child as a sacrifice to pass the cursed soot onto. But the divine curse knew that the spell wasn't perfect.
いいだろう、人にどもよ。この女子に子を産ませ、その子にまた子を産ませ、飽きるまで代々を繰り返すがよい。だが、そなたらは忘れているのではないか。人の子は一人では子を作れぬことを。
During the Age of Gods, all the land was governed by those divine beings. The children of man had crept into them and eventually taken all the regions for themselves. Most of the lenient gods had accepted this as the start of a new age and conceded their lands to the children of men. But not all of them were in accord. Their rage turned into cursed soot that erupted from their sacred mountains and rained all across the nation, signaling the end of the Age of Gods. As a result, all children of men from then on out were born with a speck of cursed soot in them. That was mankind's original sin, taking the gods' country for their own.
すすだきの生贄の子には、その両親のすすがすべて受け継がれる。すなわち、生贄と夫婦になった者のすすを代々取り込み続け、我はどこまでも肥大し続けるのだ。やがて膨れ上がった膨大なすすに、すすだきの秘術は破れ、我は解放されるだろう。その時こそが、六神彦の命の呪いが下される時。我こそは六神彦の命の呪いなり。愚かなりし、人にどもめ。しばしの間は、この体におとなしく封じられていようぞ。しかし、これより幾百年をかけて、我はさらなるすすを集め、その怒りを、呪いを、はるかに高める。 そしてこの身に蓄えうる最大限のすすを宿らせしとき、山はうめき、大地はおののき、灼熱の炎がすべてを焼き尽くす、この世の地獄を顕現させようぞ。それでこそ兄上様たちの悲しみを癒せるというもの。兄上様、必ずやこの上なき地獄の権限をお約束いたしまする。
A child of man's scale of time was nothing but a drop in the bucket compared to the span of a divine curse. The curse would rest for centuries until it could expand no further. The foolish children of men thought they had sealed the curse away with their ritual. But in reality, it was merely incubating in the sacrifice until it was ready to hatch.
しばしの別れだ、人にどもよ。次に我が目覚めるとき、この地に恐るべき災いをもたらすことを約束しようぞ。
I heard the cave's lattice doors creaking open. Someone was probably bringing me food. Since I spent nearly the entire day plagued by hauntings, it was rare that I was conscious for when meals arrived. Normally, I would just come to, only to find the food already there. That was the living hell that I, the sacrifice, was subjected to. Meals were the only ordinary part of my life. They probably felt they couldn't afford to let me do anything else in the off chance I fell ill. However, something felt different about the person bringing food this day. I could tell they were holding their breath and treading carefully. Who was it? When I saw him, I gasped.
ムツ。
静かに。
My legs had withered and atrophied, but I managed to stagger to my feet. Mutsu dashed over and helped me up.
遅くなってごめん。
いいの。来てくれてありがとう。
I buried my face in his chest and quietly wept for a short while. Maybe he was right. Maybe he was too late. There was no way to rid my body of the cursed soot, no way to save me from the world of nightmares. And yet, he'd come for me. There were occasions where I awakened from the hauntings. What bliss it was that Mutsu had come to me at such a time.
行こう。交代の槍がいつ来るかもわからない。
私のために無茶をしてくれたのですね。
君のためなら大したことじゃないさ。さあ、行こう。歩ける。
はい。
I started walking, with Mitsu guiding me by the hand. The door to the cave was wide open. I never believed I'd leave there alive. The sunlight was blinding. I couldn't keep my eyes open. But I could feel the fresh open air against my skin. The scent of nature brought back memories.
大丈夫。
目がくらんで。
かわいそうに。ずっと暗いところにいたから。
もう大丈夫です。
Once I opened my eyes, a sight from long ago flooded into me. What I found was not the outdoors, but rather a stone room. Wait. What was I... What? All my blood went cold at that ear-splitting scream of agony. The room was like a smithy. A naked man was hanging upside down from the ceiling, his face stained in blood. was... what?
Matsu?
Then who was holding my hand? I turned around in horror to discover the man next to me was no longer Mitsu. That uncanny figure was shirtless, muscular, tall, and wearing a hemp cloth around his face. That wasn't Mitsu. That wasn't Mitsu at all. Then who? Who was he? I tried shaking him off, but his grip was like a vice. He grabbed me from behind, leaving me unable to move. He held my jaw in place, preventing me from turning my head. At that moment, I finally comprehended the repulsive sight before my eyes. Mitsu was naked and hanging upside down from the ceiling. His legs were strung wide open. The other man took a saw, approached his exposed groin, and... sawed through his pelvis from his thighs upward, the sickening drone of thick pelvic bones being cleaved through like logs echoed throughout the room. Mitsu shrieked with agony with each sharp crunch of bone. I couldn't look away. The man was keeping a firm grip on my jaw, so I'd be forced to watch. Eventually, Mitsu's pelvis was split perfectly in two, and his thighs spread farther than I believed possible. The man continued sawing away. Before long, Mitsu's guts came pouring out in a convulsive pile. Even so, Mitsu wasn't dead. He vomited blood and continued his chilling screams.
Matsu! Matsu!
Another nightmare. I could no longer tell dream from reality. It seemed like I'd regained consciousness for real this time, but this had to be the start of yet another nightmare. I was sure of it. I couldn't allow myself to hope for Mitsu's arrival ever again. If I did, the evil spirits would just prey on that and continue to show me those sorts of gruesome nightmares. Besides, this was probably the beginning of a new nightmare anyway. I couldn't let my guard down and assumed I'd returned to reality. In fact, a new nightmare was already beginning. I heard several people approaching. The door creaked open and 3 of the watchmen appeared. I knew all too well how this particular nightmare went.
おお、今日は目を覚ましておるぞ。意識がある時の方が格段良いからの。
Alright, so I'm gonna pause here because I think for my audience you probably know what's going to be described here. I don't know how detailed it's going to be, but I don't think I could in good conscience have you listen to me read through this, just like with the caterpillar sequence. So I will take a break here and we'll get through this portion, and then tomorrow we'll continue on with the story. Again, I apologize. I don't really like censorship. And I think most people who are watching these or this long-form review, I think you understand and are able to handle this kind of content. I mean, this content's for adults. You know, it's like reading Dean Koontz or Stephen King or any other number of horror authors out there. You know, sometimes things are very uncomfortable and they have to be described in order to experience the true terror of them. But this is a streaming service, and the streaming service has rules against pretty much everything that adults would ever want. And there's no platform in the world out there that would have this kind of content out there. without some understanding that you know, some things exist for adults that are mature and can understand things. So that being said, we will continue tomorrow with the story. I hope you have been enjoying everything currently so far. You know, enjoying being somewhat of a relative term. But don't worry. This doesn't mean that we'll see. This will be the end. This just means we'll have to skip ahead a bit. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream.